So basically the problem that we're addressing is that B2B sales teams, so companies that are selling to other companies, they have to stay in touch with lots of people at the same time. And that's not so easy. In the past, some systems got built, right, that were helping to kind of get a little bit more control over this chaos. So Salesforce, HubSpot, your CRM systems. Yeah. And now the problem that we're actually seeing is there is so much data around these interactions, right? So the information is there, it's just hidden. And this is an example of the problem that we're addressing, right? And now you can basically come up with any question that is in that space. There is a good chance that we can dig it out and we can scale this infinitely.
Welcome to a new episode of the Mind Echo podcast, where we're diving into the ideas, thoughts, journeys of different entrepreneurs, business leaders, as well as people I'm finding really interesting that are also driving great initiatives to shape different industries within Germany. And today I'm really happy to have a conversation with Arne Wolfewicz. Arne and I crossed our paths some years ago as we were doing our studies, so our Master of Science in Management at the WHU Business School in Germany. And something that I told him in our previous call as we caught up was that I was always really impressed as I started to study at this business school of the determination and focus of people that I met during my studies to engage in an entrepreneurial career and be also determined so early in their career. And I myself, I'm still on a corporate career, and I have this respect for people doing this. And that was definitely one of the reasons why I contacted back Arne, seeing how his experience was going so far, because I thought there's a lot of we can learn from what he's experienced in the last couple of years. He's the co-founder of the company called Narratic AI, which is a company dedicated to help B2B companies to scale up their operations, their business results by deriving different insights and we will touch for sure that later on, to derive insights from sometimes data which is completely not looked into, or there is a lot of untapped potential behind that. And for that, they are leveraging technology like AI really to support businesses with that. They're also looking on how to automate different tasks and also ultimately to be able to free up time from the commercial team so they can actually focus on the things that matter, which is how they can further grow their business. So what is also interesting about Arne's profile is that he's working different areas or different disciplines like logistics, operations, marketing, and sales. And I think there's a lot we're going to hear from him. And as I said, we did not have contact for some years, and I was really surprised how much he experienced so far. So he went from a corporate environment working at Kuhn & Nagel, then switching to a role on the business development area on a company called Levity, and engaging on ventures of his own like Blocks and Brains and now Narratic AI. So he's gained a lot of experience. And I said, yeah, I'm really happy to talk with you the next minutes, Arne, to explore a bit more about your journey so far. So maybe now it's a good time to reach towards to you, also to maybe do a short introduction from your side and correct me if I said something that was not correct, please.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I was really excited when you wrote me. You clearly did your research, which I really appreciated. And so really excited for the conversation.
Great. And again, big welcome to the podcast. So I just wanted to get started, and I mean, just before we went on recording mode, just to get things going, I wanted to ask you, where is your mind currently at these days? So if there are 2 or 3 topics that you're mostly focusing on, where are you currently at?
I'm mostly thinking about messaging right now. And so I'm actually building our new website right now. So like we're doing tons of iterations on this, and we have been. And I think there's 26 letters in the alphabet, right? But like getting them into the right order is not so easy. I mean, there's so many AI tools out there, and it's a horrible value proposition nowadays, right? And it has been for a while. And so like this isn't gonna convince anyone, right? So you actually have to dig a little bit deeper and not just say, we're building this new sales AI assistant, right? Because then you've already lost everybody, right? And so I'm not going to claim that we nailed it with this round. We'll have many iterations of that in the future. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing at the moment. I'm also doing a lot of conversation, like one-to-one conversation with our first cohort of the year. So we're working with a couple of companies, and yeah, it's super super interesting. We're seeing basically how they're working throughout their own tasks, which we don't know, right? But once we see the query, we do. And it's super exciting because they come up with questions that we have never thought about, right? And but they make sense, right? And then yeah, and that's a super super interesting experience for us.
Okay, interesting. And yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm asking this is because just for making a little break and let you reflect for a moment, you realize that from the shoes of an entrepreneur and driving your business, you need to tap in complete different directions of the business and topics, keep them and work them through in parallel, and then try to make the best of the time that you have in the working with your team and so on. So yeah, but we will. I took note of that. I will come back to maybe one or the other point later on. But then that's already for me some good information to pick up later. But as I told you before, something that I'm also quite keen, even before we start talking about business and AI, what can do, what cannot, and so on. For me, it's quite interesting, and also I've got the feedback so far for the audience to really understand who's the person behind this venture you're about to share with us. And maybe the first thing that I wanted to go back is really all the way back to the beginning of your story. Maybe you can share a bit, how was your childhood, where you grew up, where exactly you're coming from? Maybe you can share a bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in the countryside of Germany in a small village with a little under 100 people living there. So basically coming from there, doing what I do today is different, at least. And so my parents, when I was young, they were both artists. They were musicians, and my mom still is. Yeah, and then actually my grandparents, they had a company, and
All
they
right.
were, in my eyes, they were pretty successful by all measures. And so for me, it was always that these were the wealthy and super super driven grandparents, right? And like I never saw them as grandparents in that sense. Then I think I was around 11. They had to close shop, right? And
All right.
they had run bankrupt, and that was a pretty big hit. And because that was something, that was always an institution in my life where I thought, okay, so this is just unbreakable, right? And this is also how I basically introduced this, right? And yeah, so like I didn't know it at the time, but it was like I had many emotions around this, and it definitely was a big part in me then also doing that, and also gaining a lot of respect of doing such a such a risky step. And um, speaking of risks, I wasn't very I wouldn't say that I was very risk on for quite a while. And I also don't think that this is not necessarily a quality that you need to have as a founder, because what you do is you basically de-risk the whole time. So what I did was, right out of school, I didn't even go to university, but I did an apprenticeship at a local bank for 3 years. So yeah, I was basically able to make some money on the side, which was tiny, but that was still the path that I thought would work better for myself than going to university. It was also for a lack of ideas, so I just didn't want to quit. So I didn't bother starting. Um, yeah, and so the apprenticeship was basically a good, like, I'm gonna say, compromise, where I could still do something that I thought was valuable for myself and had some esteem, right, which was still important to me at the time. Yeah, and then afterwards, basically a couple of weeks in, I realized that I was in a completely wrong spot, and so it was clear that I was going to go to university, but I first had to finish this off, right? That was something that I just needed for myself. Yeah, and then that's basically my childhood youth. Like I played a lot of handball, played the guitar.
Okay. All
So
right.
those were my priorities at the time.
Mhm.
And yeah, but that's pretty much where I'm coming from.
Thanks for so openly sharing. And also one reason I'm asking this, it's because sometimes, and especially for those listening in and are having this question, does it make sense to be an entrepreneur if I didn't have this mindset or chip in my head already since I was 5 years old or 6 years old or so on? Is that something that it's always there at that early, or are there really turning points or influences or drivers as you grow up that really point you step by step towards to getting to that point at one moment? And in your case, I think that, I mean, on the one hand, you mentioned you had the influence from your grandparents, and then you also took the decision to make this step in between with the apprenticeship. And then, of course, that's what ultimately, in one way or another, it's what then build a basis to then take the next decisions and to lead where you're currently at. Are there some personal traits that you've seen in yourself always since you were young? You mentioned this element that you were always not, let's say, you were always trying to manage risk best way you can, and that's something that you also consider really heavily also from a point of view of an entrepreneur. But are there other further personal traits that you have always carried on with you that you say, these define me and these really actually help me well or serve me well being where you're currently at?
So if you ask people like around my friends or so, and you repeat the question, they would burst in laughter, right? Because I am risk on compared to most people on Earth. I wouldn't necessarily put this out as a quality that I'm particularly risk averse in that sense, right? And I think you can't be as a founder, right? So you have to manage risk, like you have to be aware of it, and you have to get it down the whole time. But you have to have some courage, right?
Sure.
And I think this often gets mixed up, but I would say that this is probably something that like a trait that I always had to some degree. And this is definitely something that you need. You can't do it without, because there's just too many unknowns, and then at some point you just have to make a leap, right? And I think one other trait that I always had was a high degree of curiosity.
Okay.
And I was always a nerd, but I didn't let that shine through. So I thought it was a negative thing. I also thought that being introverted is a negative thing, which I also am, much more than I'm extroverted, right? Like it's a spectrum. But when I was a kid, or actually most people, when they're young, they're getting taught that being a nerd, let alone being introverted, is not something desirable, right? And there's many reasons why that is. But luckily it was like that for me. And at some point I started embracing it, right? And this nerdy side of me that was very late into my life that I really appreciate that as a positive quality. And I was a nerd in secrecy, if you will. And yeah, those are the ones that I can think of. I would actually point out one more trait that I did not have sufficiently,
Okay.
which I think is absolutely critical. You need to have confidence. And I think everybody is like, I was confident in some regards, but it was like I was struggling with that in certain ways where I thought, okay, so you kind of need to have this. And this actually was something that I thought of in your introduction, when you said, you look to these entrepreneurs and they're like super calm. They talk about this and that in one sentence, right? And you're like, okay. And so where do I get to learn that, right? And so it took me quite a lot of time, quite a long time, to come to the point where I thought, okay, so like I'm actually gonna risk this now, and I'm gonna try. And for that, I needed to do a couple of things. So I had to do this apprenticeship, had to go to university, had to go to a corporate, had to do consulting, had to do another startup, right? So that wasn't something where I just woke up one day and said, oh yeah, okay, so now I'm gonna found my own company. Yeah. Again, it's not something that I could boast with from my early childhood and youth. I think it was fake confidence what I had, but yeah, like at some point it became a little bit better, and then I was also ready.
And maybe connecting this element of curiosity and also gaining more and more confidence over time. Once you finish this apprenticeship, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you then decided to engage with your studies, also with the idea of let's continue exploring, let's see what comes next. And then at this stage, were you already having thoughts of, okay, after I do my studies, I already see myself starting my own business? Or were you more thinking, no, I definitely need to take the step of being in the corporate world? Or was it rather, let's go with the flow and see how it feels after I'm finished?
So I actually went to this particular university for two reasons. First of all, during my apprenticeship, I learned that there is a glass ceiling and that by going to university, you can make this glass ceiling much thinner. So in other words, like you would be limited, if judged from the outside, to do certain things, right? Regardless of how smart and good you are. That was my thinking at the time. And the other reason was I was really interested in private equity. And
All right.
so and that kind of came from my banking background, I think, because I was always interested in the corporate banking side and interested in companies in creating value and such. And so I thought, okay, so private equity is the thing for me. And what I liked about it was it's private equity is smart in the sense that they get control over a vehicle, right, or a company. Then they apply certain measures and they leverage all that by smart financial decisions. Yeah. So financing structure and all that. And I thought that, well, this is the best of both worlds, right? So you take something that's running below potential and then you inject some financing into it and you make some changes and then you win, right? And I think this spirit is actually something that never really left me. And the only thing that I didn't like so much was the path to private equity, which is basically through investment banking, M&A. And there I was a little bit surprised by the kind of people that went into that space, right? I'm not going to say that I thought they were bad, but they had like a certain vibe where I thought, okay, so I'm not sure if this is my spiel.
I think that's, to be honest, that was also valid for me. So coming from, I mean, need to be fully honest, as I came to Germany, there were some career path that I probably never even think of. And at least once I started to look into that one with some further detail, that's probably where I came to a similar realization, at least on that one as you did.
Actually, on the question of the question was if I was thinking about running my own company or setting it up. So yes, it was in the back of my mind, but I have to admit that in the beginning when I went to university, I was actually like I was kind of arrogant about the founders and the venture, like this whole startup world. I mean, I always had this idea in my mind, like yourcatfood.com or something, right? Which is where I thought, yeah, well, it's great, but like I don't really see the value in this, right? And like today, of course, I have a completely different view at these things, but I still remember that in the beginning, like there was actually more of a resistance to. I didn't go to any of these startups events, not the conference. Like I thought, okay, so I'm just going to do a corporate career or whatever, learn my ropes and then start my own company, right? That was the idea. So I also had to have a lesson.
Okay. All right. But then moving to that decision then. So you engaged indeed to go into the corporate world, and maybe not to spend so much time in this part, but still I was curious. What takeaways do you have from working in such large organizations? So what do you like? What you didn't like?
So I like the range that I got to experience. So like especially in the company that I ended up starting my career after university, it's a logistics company that's worldwide, and they have I think they had 80,000 employees. About half of them were blue collar, and so. And then I actually got to work with the management board and got to support them. And so I basically got to experience like the full range of people that are working, right? So, it could be having a conversation in a suit in the morning and then in the afternoon going to a warehouse and also connecting there. I mean, you get different flavors of that, but I think like the breadth of people that you're exposed to is interesting. It's also limiting in some sense, because you don't get the kind of entrepreneurs that inspire you in the sense that they have started this thing on their own, right? So there are people with P&L responsibility, right? They're managing millions, hundreds of millions, but still it's different, right? So it's usually not the ones, they're managers, they're not entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Right? And I think another aspect that I really liked was I got to see some parts of the world that, on business travel, which is interesting, at least for some time.
Sure.
And yeah, and also I was able to work on, like I was given the opportunity to work on a couple of really interesting things and projects where, if I think about this now, the order of magnitude was just 10 or X, right? And I didn't even question that, right? Yeah, and I think those were really the good sides. Like in the end, I just had to call it quits because one was what I already hinted at, like the level of entrepreneurial insight was limited, and so I could have made a career, but I never took it serious in the sense, that this is really going to prepare me to do my own thing, right? And that was pretty clear. I think that was tightly connected with the fact that I spent some time with friends from my university that did found their own companies. Some of them had already run against the wall, but the kind of conversation they were having with me, I was just blown away, right? Because they would talk about things, and I was just like, where did you learn all that, right? And so I saw the gap widening, and at that point I realized, okay, I have to go, yeah. And then a third one was, like, I was getting really, really interested in machine learning around 2017, and I learned programming at the time, and I also got to use some of that at the company, but like I couldn't see, like it wasn't obvious at the time. Like it was obviously some, but there was just not so much appetite to really, really invest in that and do it in a way where I thought should be right. And of course, this is extremely arrogant, right? Because I did not have this exposure to certain topics, but I just saw that some things were just not working as they could, right? And I thought software could fix that. And yeah, so at some point I had to, yeah, basically pack my bags.
All right. But then you decided then to move, if I'm wrong, that was the transition towards Levity then, where you kind of expose yourself to a more entrepreneurial environment. But even before you start maybe elaborating a bit on that experience and then how that built up to then starting your own ventures, what is really, really tricky. And I mean, on the one hand, you mentioned you had this circle of influence and impulses of other friends that you were seeing that they were already experiencing something different by building their own journeys, their own companies. But on the other hand, like you mentioned, there are these this breadth of opportunities you get in a company. You get these chances to learn a lot, to expand also by having the chance maybe to go abroad and taking this leap to say, okay, I'm currently seeing myself, probably if I would stay here for many years, maybe jump to another company and so on, I would probably be set up for the future. But taking that leap towards that entrepreneurial journey, it's not an easy one, I suppose. You're leaving many things behind to really fully engage on that journey. So how was it on your side? So how this journey looked for you after you decided then to leave behind such a big corporate environment? And what was going through your head at each stage as you were moving on?
So I think the desire was what pushed me forward. But I mean, it pushes us all. Like I distinctively remember one conversation with a good friend of mine, and he was just riffing over normal things things that he considered normal, and I was just like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he's one of the smartest people that I know, and I've known this. But still, like the way he spoke, I just realized that I was really, really getting left behind, right? The problem was that the distance was already so far that I did not think that I could just do this right out of the box, right? So there was no way I could just leave my corporate job, right?
Sure.
And get somebody to pay my allowance and
Sure.
to start my own company. Like there was just too many things, and I was quite aware of that. Like there was just too many things that I didn't know. Then I was, yeah, and then that was basically something where I realized, okay, so I kind of have to get into this theme, like I have to get exposure, but like there has to be like a step in between, right? And so then I took a huge pay cut, and yeah, and ended up going to Levity, which was a phenomenal experience for me. And yeah, that was basically what allowed me to even get into that field, right? And it was a necessity. So I think people are different in that sense, but like I was not ready to just go out and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to do my own thing now, no matter what. And I also didn't have the means, right? So like I've come from a fairly modest family in a financial sense. And so I didn't have any backing in that regard. And yeah, and it had to be like somewhat of a smooth transition for me.
Okay. Um, being aware of the time, and just then before we jump into discussing about Narratic in more detail, how is the process? So let's say to come up with an idea that you actually want to start developing and working on. Do you sit down and start figuring out which are problems that a specific target group, target audience may have, and you try to develop a concept out of it? Did it just, in your case, spark because of specific situation you were in? How this process actually works for you?
Just as wrong as it works for most people. You said it right. You spoke about an idea, right? And this is the biggest enemy, I think, that most founders in the beginning of their journeys, because they're not focused on understanding and listening and really digging out fundamental problems, but they have an idea and they have some evidence that it's a good idea. Yeah. And then they start. And this is exactly how it was for me. Yeah. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible, right? And I see it so often. Like, I sometimes get to speak to other entrepreneurs that are a little bit earlier in their journeys, and they're all running in the same trap. Yeah, and some don't, right? So there are some people that just make a leap, and I'm really, really hoping that some of the listeners are taking this seriously. But that was basically how it started for me, right? Like I was, and the worst part was, or not the worst part, but I think a pattern that you often see is when people get excited about technology, then all of a sudden they start thinking about the world, and they just try to figure out, so how could this technology make something better, right? And it's a good idea in principle, like it's kind of makes sense, and it often works, but you still have to do the work. You still have to sit down and understand what are the problems that people are talking about, and what are the specifics about it, right? And that took us quite a while, like my co-founder and I, to come to really grips with that, and to tune down our ego and not say that we have the perfect solution for whatever, is a problem here. So I think it was a lot of digging we were basically craving for validation, right? So we had this idea, and then we thought, okay, so we kind of think that this is true, and now we have to find the people that confirm this, right? And also, that is not what you should do. Just make this really clear. So what would have been the right approach, and which is what ended up working really well for us, was pick out a certain group of people that have, a certain community, right? Whatever that community is, yeah, they just need to have certain traits, and you can choose that, right? That's the coolest part. But choose a crowd and then have conversations with them. And it sounds so simple, but it's not, right? So commit to doing, I don't know, 20, 30 interviews or so in a specific niche, and that's when you start learning. And I think that's the best thing that you can do, right? Because you will have endless ideas, and ideas are worth nothing. Understanding a problem really well, and then executing on the ideas that you think make the most sense. This is basically the best way how we can go.
Thanks for sharing. And I pick also on one point that you were saying before about working on fine-tuning messaging, but also how that you can really nail a good idea by talking with the actual portion of the audience you're going to be reaching out to build a powerful and clear value proposition that resonates with target groups. Sometimes it's underestimated. I think that you would just sit down and try to say, okay, this is because I believe it is, or because it sounds nice. But I think the more concrete it is, and the more feedback-based or feedback-driven it is from the actual group of people you're going to be serving, and actually test it with them, I think it's starting to get actually that element of really resonating with them.
And it's not so easy. I mean,
no,
it's
for sure.
so easily said. You just reach out to a couple of people. This is also a technique on its own that you have to learn at some point, right? And it's not like this is like the fairy tale version, right? That we're familiar with, because we all know these consumer apps that somehow pop up on our phone, right? And it's working flawlessly, and all my friends are already using it. So this is not innovation. Fully functioning product, even if they did change it 10 more times, right? But they have sat down with like 1 or 2 and then 5 people, right? Showed it to them and got a lot of crap for it, right? But like there's so much work going into this until you reach like a point where things are getting obvious. Even having a sufficient number of conversations with people is work, and not easy.
So to maybe before I also ask you to then actually based on the current standing of the business as it is, and that ask you to please go in some more details and describe what's the offering you guys are bringing to the market. Just wanted to get your perspective of the view, and I had to bring this question, although sometimes when I'm discussing about AI, I think it's overly used, and then sometimes people are just thinking because AI is there, that's the ultimate solution. At the end, it's just one more enabler. It's one more piece of technology that you can leverage. And there are multiple ways on how you can do it. And of course, I'm not saying it can bring tremendous benefits if applied or leveraged in the right way. But how do you see the topic? So how do you see the topic of artificial intelligence? How do you evaluate it? And how did you actually thought for the context of your business? This is actually a really strong enabler we can anchor to as well.
When I first heard the term machine learning, that was, I think, in late 2016. And that's when it clicked, right? I thought, okay, so you're telling me that I can just feed a computer data, and then it looks at the data and it finds some pattern in it. And then it is able to take an example that it has not seen, and it's going to give me a right or a very close solution to the question, right? Or like it's actually going to make a prediction that is not so. And when I heard that for the first time, I had tried like Google autocomplete, like I had seen all that, right? But still, like I somehow never made the leap that this is actually something that is accessible to individuals like myself, right? That was when things shifted, because like, I'm not going to say that I had a learning disability, but I was not the most diligent learner, right? And like, I like learning things, but studying was horrible for me. And so I thought, okay, so basically I can have a system that is able to do certain things that I'm not. So it can take care of the heavy lifting. Yeah. And so coming to today, this has just accelerated tremendously, right? Because in 2016, like, you could do cool things, but like it wasn't anywhere close to what is possible today. And the other thing is that most people did not have an intuitive understanding of what AI can do, right? So when I joined Levity, I was basically talking to a lot of prospects of theirs, and a lot of people had never consciously used AI. Yeah, incredible today. Yeah, but still, like the transformational potential that you have in these systems nowadays is just absolutely unbelievable. And at the same time, it's not trivial to get value out of them, right? So you can have your email draft corrected, yes, and you can do a lot of things that are much more complex than that, right? But still, like, getting it to a point where it solves problems in a way a human would is still not so easy to pull off, right? As weird as it sounds. And so yeah, I think AI is just now a base ingredient of any software startup. So you don't even have to put it on there. But still, like, people do, right? And it's the same for agentic right now. This is now the next term that people get hyped about. But it's just like an absolute base ingredient. And if you don't think about adding just a stupid OpenAI call into some aspects of your app, then you're doomed to fail. Yeah. And this is not to say that you can solve every problem with it, or that you should. So there is still a lot of merit in rule-based automation.
Sure.
And sometimes you don't even have to build software to solve a certain thing. But yeah, it's just a normal part of the tool belt now. And the cool thing is that you can get like 10 or 20x improvements with these systems if you know how to use them. And I think this is what fascinates me to this day.
All right, understood. And yeah, fully stand to what you shared. But then let me connect to one of the points that you mentioned, and then let's bridge towards the guys you're offering, the solution you guys are offering. So you mentioned ideally you can getting to a stage to solve a problem, or leveraging to get to that kind of stage. What exactly, or what problem are you guys tackling at the moment, and what are you offering to your customers as of today? Maybe you can elaborate a bit more, and then let's go in some more details around it.
So basically the problem that we're addressing is that B2B sales teams, so companies that are selling to other companies, they have to stay in touch with lots of people at the same time. And that's not so easy. So if you think about yourself, how good are you really staying in touch with your friends? Yeah.
Sure.
And basically being on top of what's going on in their lives, right? Or even what, not even that, but even what your last interaction was. Now, transpose this into a setting where you have a somewhat interested buyer, right? And a somewhat interested seller, and they somewhat know what a potential solution could be to a somewhat defined problem, right? And you can already picture that there are some traps. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what happened in the past is that systems got built, right? That were helping to kind of get a little bit more control over this chaos, which it is in the end, right? So Salesforce, HubSpot, your CRM systems, yeah. Or you can also just have a spreadsheet, right, and your contacts on it, right, and have like some information on it. And now the problem that we're actually seeing at the moment is there is so much data around these interactions, right? So this podcast is basically becoming like some kind of transcript, right? And then it's on the internet, right? And then somebody can come, analyze the transcript and figure out how many times I said, or something, And so it's the same with companies, right? Like if they have some kind of interaction, right? And there are so many nuances that are taking place. And the problem is that you don't know which nuances are going to be relevant in 3 months from now, right? So this is one of the issues that you have. And so the information is there. It's just hidden, right? It's hidden in an email, in a note, in some Slack conversation. It's hidden maybe in a transcript. And so in 3 months from now, you want to find out, okay, so what are actually the features that our prospects are talking about that they like about our competitors? Yeah. This isn't something that you record just to have it, right? It's unless you decide to do so, but then you're not recording all of the other information. Yeah. And this is an example of the problem that we're addressing, right? And now you can basically come up with any question that is in that space. There is a good chance that we can, like if the information is somewhere in the systems, that we can dig it out, right? And we can scale this infinitely. So like if you can have 20, 30,000 leads or so, conversations, and it's going to take like a couple of seconds for this answer to be ready. And it will have looked at each of the relevant records.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think probably I can then now engage, although I need to be mindful of the time, of 1 more hour or even longer of talking about CRM adoption in B2B and all the long list of reasons of why this is, as of today, still an issue in many companies. And indeed, so I think from the perspective of the actual let's say people putting the most of the input, so people from the sales force, in most of the cases, it's one more task for them that they need to input, document things in a system. And then in many cases, either there is not an additional resource that helps them to understand or derive the actual insight or value of why they should continue doing this. In some cases, there is not further buy-in because there is not understanding of what's actually indeed the value of operating with a CRM. But like you mentioned, there are a lot of insights that you can derive if you actually have the right support and enablers to make the most of that data and all of that data that's being built over years. So I think that in general, what you guys are targeting, it's for sure something which addresses a big pain point that many B2B companies face and will continue facing. So can you explain a bit how are you actually or how are you deploying this solution? Is this something that you're already starting to work with different CRM suppliers? Maybe you can explain a bit more just to understand.
Yes. So I think a good way to put it is that we're actually a headless CRM system. So
Okay.
Headless in the sense that we don't give you the interface, right? Like an interface in a conventional sense where you can then create your reports or, you invite your users and all that. So the primary access is through a chat. But the chat is connected to a couple of tools. And so one of the tools can be your CRM system. And like, I don't mean this in a derogative way by any means. At the same time, the CRM system is basically becoming a database for us. Yeah. And so we know that people are using it, right? So
Sure.
we have many customers that have a dozen salespeople or so working with Salesforce on a daily basis. And they basically just look at this tool all day long, and they input some data, they look up some data. And so we can interact with that, right? And so we can read information from it. We can feed it back. We're also connected to the system that maybe transcribes their sales conversations. We have a couple of customers that are that are basically doing a lot of telesales. So many of the conversations are recorded, and this is where the nuggets are. And yeah, so the like we're not actually competing with CRM software per se. There's always going to be a place for it, and we're definitely not going to build like a lot of boilerplate that you need to have if you want to compete with a CRM provider. But at the same time, we can be this intelligence layer that just works in harmony with this.
Okay. All right. Okay, understood. When trying to leverage and again bringing the term of AI, I think there is always this in many cases when having discussions also inside companies or with other people, this underestimation regarding the importance of having a good data foundation to actually get good output or results out of this. And let's say a really challenging topic in terms of trying to make the best out of CRM data is actually the quality of the data that it's actually maintained on the CRM. So how are you guys trying to tackle this, to bring this discipline or understanding that it's really important that to be able to make more out of it, the earlier part of the process also needs to work in the right way?
Yeah, so this is a common concern that we get, that people are afraid to show their data. Yeah. But this is not a problem, right? So we run on the assumption that the data is going to be crap, right? In terms of how it's set up. I think this is actually something that you should expect from a company that is AI first. Yeah. So if you work with a software vendor and then you have to prepare your data in a certain way, then it's not your fault, right? The company is messing up something big time. And so the way it works for us is, or the companies that we're working with, we usually have this conversation once, right? And then they still don't believe it, right? And then we start working together. And then the next conversation that we have about data is not about data quality, like as an input, but data quantity, right? So
Okay.
all of a sudden we're shifting the conversation to, it's not so much about preparing the data in any way, because this is something that we can take care of. What's critical is, okay, so how can we get more data in, right? And that's a good conversation to have, right? Because it's usually not a problem for a company to connect let's just stick with the transcripts, right? So they are transcribing their calls in some way, and now like somehow these transcript IDs have to land in the CRM system somewhere, or like summary or something like that. If there is like some connection, right? Like if we can find out, okay, so Alonso Rondontello, like how many of these are there in the world? Okay, so like 4, but it's probably the one that we see in our CRM system is likely the one that I'm looking at right now. And so we do that kind of matching in the background. And so all you basically need is to let us know where a certain data is stored, and then we can access it. And on the consumption side, so when you get your like a response from our AI, of course, this is a completely different situation, right? Then you want to have it, like the whole point of it is to get structure into it, right? Like you want to understand who are the 3 most important deals that are currently facing the biggest risks. You don't want to have like some fuzzy answer with 100 results, but you want to have 3, right? And you want to be sure that those are the 3 are the right ones. Yeah. And so we basically feed you with high data quality, but we ask for very little. Yeah. And I think this is I'm not trying to brag about this, but this is something that you have to do today. Yeah. And if you don't excel on that level, right, like taking actual work of the shoulders of your customer, then you're in the wrong space, right? And you should definitely not call yourself an AI company.
And I think what you were mentioning, it's something that people will need to try to get, or need to focus on how to improve the topic of. I was just thinking on how to identify the most relevant or urgent or important opportunities that you have in your pipeline that may really lead to more business. So probably you've seen more than what I've seen, at least on my experience talking with different customers. But sometimes the way how those funnels are set up at the different companies, then if you have a certain intake approach for whatever the definition of a lead is going to be for the company, I think sometimes people call a lead if somebody clicked on a specific page, while some others maybe call a lead if somebody book a demo, they order a sample or something. And I think the definition of a lead from company to company may be different. But even in any case, if you're getting a big list of them, the art of of really prioritizing and focusing the efforts on the most interesting ones, I think that if you can really leverage intelligence or intelligent solution that can guide you towards that, that's also really going to help businesses to really allocate time where it really matters. And that's something that you really want to, again, picking up on. So I was looking into the company, really on how you can help businesses focus on how to further seize business growth. So
if I may jump
sure.
on that, because I
Sure.
think this is something that many people never thought about in this way. So pipeline stages, or a definition, what is a lead and what is a prospect, or whatever conventions you have. These are made for humans. So these are ways for a human to have like some better intuitive understanding of what is this thing that I'm looking at right now, right? Is this a lead that is rather mature, or is this, somebody that just clicked on a website? For us, this is not so, like for our system, it looks at it a little bit differently. It looks basically at a chain of interactions, right? So you have your visit, and then you have maybe a discovery call, and then you have a demo. It doesn't matter in which stage somebody put in a lead. Like, we will look for that, right? Like if somebody said something on close loss, like we will respect that, and we will basically consider this as, okay, so this is the information. But in the end, what we're looking for is information gain, right? And like, how does this information on a certain object, like how much fit is there in it, right? And if the CFO at some point said, I will never work with this company, ever, right? Then this is important information, and
for sure.
It doesn't matter at which stage you collect this, but the sooner you find out like these hard requirements that don't make something like that happen, the better, right? But like in the end, those definitions are typically for humans to just have like some sense of what's actually going on.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned also earlier, at the end you are collecting data continuously, and then you're trying to identify certain patterns out of the data that you can see, and ultimately predict where do I see the highest impact or the highest chance of success based on the data patterns. So yeah.
Based on the questions, right? So there's no single formula for what's a promising opportunity, right? So you have to have actual insight and ask the right questions in order to really segment an audience in this way, right? And founders or VP sales or something, they all know these things. The problem is just it's really, really expensive to get to this information in a quick way possible in order to then take the next decision on it. Yeah, and so that's basically what we are focusing on then, right? Or that is this kind of information and the speed at which you get it. This is essentially how we enable our customers.
Talking about again the customers, you mentioned before, as we were just talking on a general level about the importance of testing your value proposition, what you're offering, and so on, running some discussions with 20, 30 more if you could people, but translating that maybe to running your own company and your startup, and when you have a solution which is rolled out, how are you including or what's the relevance of including this actual user feedback into your future development? How are you handling that?
So this is above everything else, and it's so expensive to get to feedback, especially early on, as I said earlier. And actually getting somebody to invest a minute into your application in the early days is really hard.
Okay, yeah.
And so what I mean is, there's basically such a huge competition for attention, right? And it comes from everywhere, right? And it doesn't matter if it's in the B2B or B2C setting, like everybody is short on time. And you can't just ask somebody to, that they will happily sit in a discovery call with you for 30 or 60 minutes and tell you about all the problems they have. But, they're not going to just sit there for a week and try out every iteration of your app, right? So you have to be really careful, to not annoy them in a way. And when they do give you feedback, this is this is gold. This is absolute gold, great, because it reveals exactly the next step that you should be doing, right? And at some point, the user requests are getting to a level where you're not able to tend to each and every of these individually, and that's also fine, right? But this is a good thing to have. Yeah? And if you're basically getting software off the ground, then this is a problem that you're not so concerned with in the very beginning. Yeah. And then at some point, then you start to think about, okay, so are we seeing certain patterns? So yeah, 3 users are asking about that. And so you build that, right? Because the others is just one. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
And or then you think about, does this somehow align with my roadmap? Like, does it make sense, or is it something that makes sense now or later? Yeah. But in the end, you can have a strong product vision, but I think it's a good idea to then adjust your roadmap basically on a daily basis or on a weekly basis to what user feedback you're getting.
And based on the feedback or the latest patterns that you are getting, and also being aware, and I know this is a tricky one because seeing how technology is evolving and the speed it's changing, although we see that there is maybe a certain plateau and it's not going to go as fast maybe on some topics as on others. What are you excited about the future? Maybe from in a general perspective, seeing how technology is evolving, but also what are you excited about regarding Narratic as well, and the next steps you have in mind for the company?
So in general, I'm just really excited about what is becoming possible with technology. It's amazing to me to think about so if I just look at our customers, what they used to do and what things they could drop altogether, right? And it's interesting, people get used to that very fast. Yeah. So, and it's the same for you, right? Like ChatGPT is nothing special for you anymore, right? Because you're so used to that level of quality, right? And you just take it for granted. But this is still a good thing, right? Because you all of a sudden, the nature of your work changes. And I know this isn't what some people want, right? But for the ones that do want to focus more on speaking with customers, for instance, they can do that, right? Because all of this data entry and wrangling a certain data or so, creating a report for somebody, all of this is going away. And I think the same is true in so many areas of life. I'm a little bit scared by what this might lead to, because this definitely has societal implications.
Sure.
I think it's really hard to foresee some of the effects, but in the grand scheme of things, I think we're on a pretty good in actually solving some major blockers, right? And basically releasing lifetimes worth of easy work, which isn't actually what people want to do in the first place. Yeah, and I think for us, and we're still fairly small. We also try to stay small in terms of headcount. But yeah, I'm super excited by what I'm seeing with working with customers now, and the user feedback is getting better and better, and error logs are getting more complex, right? Which is also good. But we're basically getting out of the kindergarten version of this, and this is super exciting. I think there's unlimited potential for what we're doing. And a couple of months ago, still I wouldn't have made that bold of a claim so easily. But now I kind of know where we're headed, and I have plenty of evidence to also back this up. Yeah? And this gets me extremely excited. Yeah. Because I know that with the more success we have, the nature of my work is also going to change, right? And this is extremely important in my case, right? Because I can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. And and I also feel in control in some sense of what's going on, which was also not always the case. And so the next challenges I know are going to be just as hard as all the others, but I know that have like certain basics under control finally. So that's good.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see where you guys are headed, and then maybe we can catch up in some time down the road just to really see how things went. Because like you said, as you start developing, growing, moving forward, this really requires you as a founder and leading this company to take certain decisions, adjust, and so on. So looking forward to hear later on how things went. Being aware of the time, just wanted to ask you 2-3 final questions also, maybe as inspiration for those that are in a similar journey as you are, or at least aspiring to follow a similar journey as well. One point that I found quite interesting from one of the blog posts you did was related to finding the right co-founder. Maybe you can just elaborate a bit your thoughts regarding the importance of it, and yeah, what kind of role really plays having the right person or people next to you on this journey.
Yeah. So Hagen is a person that I have incredible respect for and a lot of unlimited trust in. We're really good friends. So this is easily forgotten, and it doesn't have to be that, but I really enjoy that fact about our relationship. And we spend a lot of time together, and it's nice to be a person that you really, really like. So in terms of what to look for, so I already gave a couple of hints. Like I think you shouldn't settle for like a situationship, right? Where you're not absolutely confident at any given point in time that you want to work with this person, and that you think this person is going to contribute, not because they're like it's not like you're hiring somebody, right? It's
Exactly.
like you actually deciding to walk through life together. And so it doesn't matter if like they can have a similar skill set, right? I think this is like, of course it helps if you're complementary, but
Sure.
like in the end, like both people need to have the will and ability to push the limits. Yeah. And so if you find such a person, that's fantastic. If the person happens to know things that you don't, it's even better. So Arne is an absolute genius when it comes to like all things data and software engineering, but he's also extremely interested in marketing and sales and company building. Yeah. And so like there has to be like both people have to want the same thing in the end. And I think a good proxy is, do I want this person to be successful? Yeah, regardless of myself. But if the answer to that is yes, then you likely found a reasonable fit on the personal side, and then the skills and so on. This is something that you can develop over time, but ideally there's a little bit of difference in that.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no, thanks a lot for sharing that. As said, I think that you're exposed to so many different decisions when you say, okay, I will take the leap and I will go in this venture. And I think, like you mentioned, being able to find somebody that it's also a good, companion along this journey, it's really key as well to be able to endure as well this journey and make the best of it. But again, I think it's not an easy one to land to a stage that you're feeling on a good feeling.
There's a way to find out, and it's not, I don't know if you can fabricate such a scenario or if you should, but in a way we are lucky that we had some big tests in the beginning, right? So we had a lot of basically things that we didn't know, like walls we ran into, and so we had plenty of opportunities to basically call it quits. And like each time we ended up saying no, like we will keep on working together, right? Like, and yes, that wasn't great. And I think if you have these like serious conversations and serious situations, also like maybe something that is outside of your control, if you have this very early on, then you quickly find out what quality the other person has. Yeah. And so I think what's rather bad is if things are going super smoothly, right? And for some reason, you both went to McKinsey, right? And you raised like 4 million as your pre-seed round, and then with 6 people or 12 people working and sitting on your payroll, you figure out, okay, so this person has dramatically different values from mine. Yeah. And it's showing in the first setback. And so like, I'm not trying to down talk these consulting firms, right? It's just a pattern that I'm seeing a lot, right? Is that people come together, right? They're founding each other through a meetup for people looking for co-founders, right? And then all of a sudden they're flushed with cash, and then they're still haven't gone through a serious problem together. So I think if there's a way to kind of test how a person behaves in a not so good situation, that's definitely useful.
Okay. All right. You are, again, thinking at the beginning of the conversation, you're thinking or in your head is going, okay, I need to work on messaging on the website. I need to talk to customers. You're looking into your solution, but you're also trying to stay aware and keep up the pace with how technology is moving. What do you do to disconnect or to relax or to say, or to recharge your batteries?
So I was started with meditation a couple of years ago. I got into yoga, which is amazingly good on me. And yeah, I try to read. So like when we get off this, hope that I can resist, continue to work for the rest of the day, read instead. I think sports, it's the usual suspects, right? It's no different for me than for anybody else. I just think that like for me, it's showing quickly when I drop certain things that like the state of my being just deteriorates, right? And I get more anxious, I get stressed. Sometimes, I also can't really avoid it, or like it just is. And, and then also sometimes this has victims, right? So like, oftentimes I'm just not as like I often fail to live up to my own expectations in many regards. Yeah, and I think it's no different for everybody else. But yeah, in the end, like trying to balance like the different areas of your life, like seeing your friends, seeing your family, not kind of disconnecting and just plowing in the work. These things are super important, right? And it's this super, super stupid sentence, but because it's said so often, but you always have to remind yourself that that this is not a sprint, but a marathon, right? And you're not going to make such a huge difference by working until 11 at night for a week, right? Because you're going to be trashed the next week and over the weekend, and your friends are going to be worried and all that, right? And so you just have to find like a cutoff, and then you have to figure out like, how can I actually be better at what I'm doing, right? Because this is something that you basically need to adopt as a founder, right? And I never thought that I was going to be able to do the things that I'm doing today. But it's something that you also have to think about and read about. Yeah. So.
All right. No, thank you very much. And I think for those listening, I think it's also good. To hear also these kind of techniques or approach. I think everybody is different. Maybe there are some things that we all tend to do in a similar way. But yeah, as said, I'm quite well aware on the level of multitasking and level of task and focus you need to have as you really drive these kind of ventures or companies. So that's why it's quite interesting as well to see and understand how you're also trying or managing to disconnect. Maybe just one final question and one final reflection, maybe for those listening. I'm pretty sure there are some people that are either on the earlier stage of their careers, or could be like even on a later stage and really thinking, should I take a leap? Should I engage on this kind of venture? Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be a nightmare? What kind of advice could you give to people really willing or thinking on engaging with their own first venture?
Yeah, I think the best way to do it is to just do it, because the nice thing, like one thing that you can really count on is that if you're not ready for it, or if you're not really, really willing to do it, then the market is going to tell you, right? And all the problems that you're encountering, they're going to be so obvious, right? And you're just going to quit. And that's fine. It's totally fine. Like in so many situations where it was like very, very thin thread, and I have the greatest respect for everybody who calls it quits and decides just want to do a vacation, or I want to do anything but this. So I think being scared, it's natural to be scared, right? And I am scared of certain situations still to this day. And I have resistance, and I'm tired and don't want to do certain things, and that's okay. Totally okay. But don't settle for, I wish I could. right? And then not give it a try, because that's the worst thing that can happen, right? Because if you do that, then you're failing twice. So instead you can just try it and then, decide, okay, this is just not for me.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much again, Arne, for the conversation. I really appreciate that we had the chance to come in contact again. Really happy that I get the chance to learn a lot from you. So get really many insights from your experience so far. And I'm pretty sure the ones listening will be able to do the same. So yeah, I would say this is where we end our conversation. Big thank you for taking the time. I can only say that it's quite interesting and exciting what you guys are working on. And I'm really looking forward to see where the journey takes you in the next weeks, months, years. So looking forward to stay in contact.
Thank you. Yeah, I can only give it back. It was a super cool conversation and really good questions. And also thank you for doing that. So you're giving me a platform here. I haven't done many podcasts in the last months, and it's great. And you were asking about basically how they get started. Just do a damn podcast, right? Because it's close enough, right? Or it is. You can actually make this a business, right? If you want, and just try it out. If this is something that you're interested in. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of respect for you doing this. I know how much work it is, and appreciate you basically preparing all this perfectly, and also great connecting with you. Really enjoyed this.
Great, thank you very much, Arne, for that. And as said, for all of those listening, thank you very much as well for tuning in. Looking forward to having you also in future episodes. Thank you. If you enjoyed the conversation, I would really appreciate your support. So depending where you're listening to it, don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast and leave any questions or comments. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you in the next episode.